What's up, folks? This is Justin Garcia, aka Master Chim, and on the line for our benefit today, we have Coach Paul Thompson of yogaforthewesternbody.com. Paul, what's going on, my man?
Nothing much, man. Glad to be here.
All right, good. So, Paul and I have known each other for a couple of years now. We first got connected with some of the mindset training that I had done a while back, and we had stayed in touch. And one of the unique things about Paul is, and I guess I'm talking to the listeners right now. I'm not talking to you, Paul. But one of the interesting things about you, Paul, is that you've been doing yoga a long time, and in all the years that you've been doing yoga, one of the things that you started dealing with was, and the title of your information, your brand, I don't know what the hell you call it, is Yoga for the Western Body. So it's a very unique insight into how people who have quote unquote Western bodies and what they could do to do yoga more effectively. That sort of makes sense, right?
Yes, exactly.
All right, good.
Western body.
Go ahead.
Western body, I guess a lot of times when you're being taught how to teach yoga, I think a lot of times you're taught like what the ideal person is, or what an ideal yoga pose or an approach to yoga would look like. And then you get into real life and you've got somebody who's maybe had a knee replacement, or who's 30 pounds overweight, or has a shoulder problem, can't raise their arm over their head. What does that person do if they want to practice yoga? So
right.
I noticed I was getting more of these people than what some people would maybe call the ideal. So
right. Well, one of the things that also intrigued me with your perspective is that, you're an athlete and you're not built like one of these, typical, legs crossed, super thin, bendy Indian guys that people are used to seeing. You're somebody who has played sports throughout your life. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that history. What is exactly your background in the physical, whether it be sports, fitness, what have you? Start from the beginning. Where are you from?
From the beginning, my first love was always football, and I played football probably from the time I was organized football from the time I was 5 until I graduated college. So that was always my approach, and that of course required a lot of strength, speed, and power. And so a lot of my training that I personally did was centered around that. And I got lucky and had great coaches throughout my life that actually had a good bit of knowledge and instilled in me, I guess a recognition that you need to have those things to be successful in football and to play football and to be able to walk away from football eventually as well.
So you've been a weightlifter for a long time.
Yes.
And in all your years of playing football, injuries, was that a typical thing?
I've never had horrible injuries. Probably the worst injury I had, I stepped in a hole one day after practice and turned an ankle. And that was, other than...
You better knock on a piece of wood right now. Don't tempt the universe. But but one of the things that I found when I was doing when I was playing football, is that the more specified or specialized my body became for football, the more I would experience injuries. And it's kind of funny that you mentioned the one time you hurt yourself was outside of football, stepping on something. Not that it's a direct connection, but I didn't really get injured too much playing football, bumps and bruises. But the more I specialized, the more I would get injured when I went to play something else. And specific for me, it was basketball. And a lot of times I would get shoulder injuries in basketball, which I don't think was very common, but I attribute it to the lack of range of motion in my shoulders, because everything was grab the ball, tuck it in, and don't let anybody move you. So in your experience, how much did weight training play a role in your physical preparation while playing football?
Again, I had a lot of my early coaches were big believers in it. In strength training, number one is a way to stay injury free, but also to be successful. We probably had the smallest offensive line of any high school ever. I think I was probably midway at that time, and I probably weighed 175 pounds at the time, and I was 5'9".
Where'd you go to school?
In Virginia, Halifax County Senior High School in Virginia, and then from there I went to Hampden-Sydney College in Virginia, also Division III, and played football there. So, being the size that we weren't the biggest team around, we had to be one of the best conditioned and one of the strongest teams around. So that kind of informed how we approach.
Of all time, what is your one most impressive lift?
I did squat 500 to parallel.
Yeah, that's legit. Right. So here's the thing. Like, I've known you for some time, and I'm bringing out some things that you and I have discussed on occasion. But I think the connotation is yoga guys are these weak, bendy, just like leaf-like bodies that don't really resonate with people who actually lift weights and have impressive levels of strength. So squatting 500 pounds is nothing for anybody to balk at. And I like how you mentioned the parallel, because a lot of guys say they squat 500 pounds, but it really looks like they're dancing with 500 pounds, not squatting with it. So legit. So as you progress from there, you eventually get into fitness as a profession, right? How did that transition occur?
Well, my first job after graduating college was actually in a chemistry laboratory and for an environmental consulting firm. And I did it for almost 2 years and just had to get out of there. Being locked away in a lab or, for hours at a time I realized wasn't for me. And so that company and I ended up parting ways. I went back to school and decided to study sports medicine and exercise physiology. And from there, one of the quickest ways to put that information to use was to become a trainer. So that's
where was that? So you were in Virginia, you went to college in Virginia. When you went back for exercise physiology, that was in Virginia too?
No, that was actually down in Alabama. That was at, I think back then they called it the United States Sports Academy. It was a private graduate level school that they had sports marketing, they had sports medicine, and exercise physiology.
So you became a trainer after that. Where was that?
I trained a little in Mobile, Alabama at the YMCA there in Mobile. But most of the training that I did after that was actually here in New York. I moved to New York, moved out to Queens, Rego Park, and trained at a commercial gym out there.
Right. Now, eventually at some point during this journey, you started yoga. What was your introduction to yoga?
Well, the first time I actually did yoga seriously, I had gotten a DVD, put the DVD in, did the first few minutes and thought I was going to throw up. And I was, I was still lifting fairly heavy at the time and doing a lot of work, and almost thought I wasn't going to make it through the sun salutations, the beginning part of that day. I guess just the breathing and the bending and all that and trying to coordinate it and everything just really sent me for a loop, but powered my way through it. And at the end, I felt great. I was actually high, and I was like, all right, I got to do this again. Number one, it shouldn't have been that hard, but number two, I've got to do it again because it actually feels good to be done. It had a different feel than when you finish a heavy lift, or if you've set a PR or something like that. It was a different feel. It was a different kind of high.
Right. Now, did you find that in the beginning there was any carryover from your athleticism into yoga, or was it a completely different discipline you found you had to learn?
There was definitely some carryover. It was more of a different approach, I guess, especially, playing football and, trying to reach certain, benchmarks in weightlifting and strength training. Sometimes you work out despite your body, or you train despite your body. Whereas with yoga, you really had to listen to your body. And it was a new perspective for me, I think.
Mm-hmm. More of a connection, you would say?
Yeah, more of a tuning in, I think. Whereas I think with strength training, I'm more had the idea that, okay, I need to do this lift today. I need to lift this much. You know
Our
what?
body,
I don't care if
right? Almost like our bodies are
I don't feel
slaves.
100%.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you what to do, and you're just going to do it whether you like it or not. Like that's the way that works. I've been there.
Right.
So now, at some point, you're practicing yoga, and you decide that you wanted to teach. I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to share that good feeling that I had with other people. I guess you could almost call it a calling. I guess I felt so good. I felt like I was getting such benefit from my yoga practice, even such as it was at the beginning, that I felt like I wanted to expose other people to it as well.
So you went from first watching tapes. What did you buy how to teach yoga tapes at that point? Like, how did that transition?
No, honestly, probably for the first whole year, I just worked on my practice myself. I started going and taking classes in person. A couple different yoga studios. Found one that I really had one that had classes that worked for my schedule, but also had a teacher that I could actually connect with, and started a regular practice.
Where was the teacher?
What was that?
Where was the teacher? Like, what was that connection?
The teacher was at a studio here in Manhattan, and it was really kind of a no nonsense approach to yoga. It was, breathe, do your yoga. You know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. You just need to do it now, kind of thing. And I think at that point in my life, that was the approach I needed.
Right.
A pretty strict, do it, don't talk about it, that kind of approach.
Right. So in my world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts, one of the big criticisms that goes on, and traditional martial arts, before mine, was you have people who practice the art in America, and then you have people who practice it the real way from the country of origin. For karate, it's Japan. For Taekwondo, it's Korea. For Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's Brazil. And there's this transition. How did you find your way or navigate through that? Was there, or maybe a better question is, did you ever feel that what you were getting in your relationship with your instructor was less than authentic or could be more authentic? Or was there just at some point, I also want to try this instead of just this? How did that relationship with the world of yoga build?
Well, I think the style that I was taking at the time, Ashtanga yoga, most of the teachers that wanted to call themselves Ashtanga teachers had to go to India and actually, study with the originator of that style for a certain number of weeks or months, almost every year, or at certain intervals throughout their career. So a lot of times, a teacher might be gone for at least a month or so once a year while he or she went and studied in India. So I felt like I was getting a pretty authentic practice, or getting authentic teaching.
Right.
And that style of yoga is, for the average person, is pretty much the same every time. It wasn't like they were adding more poses. You were just trying to either, I guess for lack of a better word, you were trying to perfect the poses that you'd already been exposed to.
Mm-hmm. And in all your years of doing yoga now, what are some of this? Because one of the things, like, I'm completely disconnected from the world of yoga. So a lot of these, paradigms I'm taking in as you're describing them. So the styles of yoga over your career, what type of styles or what type of teachers have you been connected to?
It runs the whole gamut. Some teachers that were definitely more on the spiritual side, and it's not about the physical part of it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's been some that's, it's all the physical stuff first. Get that stuff done first, then you'll be able to do the other stuff. So I think if you wanted to kind of look at the styles that I've either studied or been exposed to, it's pretty much run the gamut all the way through. And even some of the teacher training, it's pretty wide range. Some hardcore science, like, look, your shoulder's going to rotate 10 degrees when you do this particular pose, to, breathe in the universe and breathe out, that kind of stuff. So there's a wide range.
So tell me a little about your teacher training, because what I'm trying to paint a picture of is, here's a regular American football player trainer, right, who's got an education, but started yoga, threw up the first time he did yoga on a tape, but progressed to the point where he has a level of expertise that he's actually developed something that is worth sharing. So getting to that teacher training, what are the various ways you've done that? Was it something that you've done in one phase in your life and then went to teach, or is it something that you've sort of connected with over the years?
I think it's always first been about the practice itself. Like, you have to do that practice. You have to, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, put in the time. You've got to expose yourself to it enough, so that if you're telling somebody about it, you know what you're talking about, or you can put your own insight into it. You can put your own coloring or flavor to telling someone how to get into a certain pose that they might be struggling with, as opposed to just saying, well, they used to teach us that the leg has to rotate this way and you have to do this and you should be focused on that. I can say, well, you know what? Push your right foot into your left foot for a second. Let's see, see if
And
that
now,
actually.
So now, who did you train with in order to do this? Were there individuals? Were there, like, I went to this, 10-day camp to learn this, how to bend my
It was, it was a 500-hour teacher training where you went definitely every weekend, I think from September to sometime in that following spring. If I remember right, it seems so long ago now. Plus, you were expected to practice a certain amount during the week and observe a certain number of classes. And
so you went through an official, like, curriculum.
Yeah, it was a course that would have been at least a semester, probably 2 semesters, in a college course.
Right, I got you.
Right.
So
And then,
go ahead.
And then after that, I went ahead and sought even further. That was more of a general education. Then I went and took more advanced yoga anatomy classes and teaching technique classes and things like that. And I went to yoga conferences and, got exposed to even more styles.
So switching gears for a second, because it's funny, because there's a parallel there that I see between your approach to yoga and your personal training. So you have a legitimate pedigree in education when it comes to the personal training, but you've also sought other people. And the reason I bring this up is because you and I have had conversations, and it's like, oh yeah, I used to follow him, or I used to go to his seminars, and so in the personal training world, physical preparation, however you want to call it, who are some of the people that in the 90s you were following?
Paul Chek was one of the first guys. He actually got me to stay in the business. There was a point, I think right around 2000 or 2001, I was thinking of getting out of the business. And I heard Paul Chek give a lecture. It was almost, it must have been right after 9/11. I heard him give a lecture, and that kind of kept me involved. He kind of reignited a fire for me, and went from there. There's been a lot of others. Gray Cook, he was originator of the functional movement screen. He's got a good following. He has a good approach. He's a big kettlebell guy. From there, it kind of went to Pavel Tsatsouline, which we've talked about him. With kettlebells, I've taken the RKC course back before you did Strong First and things like that. So it kind of just, one teacher usually led to another, and somebody, you get curious about someone else and you kind of want to go deeper somewhere else, and just keep going. Same thing in yoga. Same thing happened in yoga.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to sort of take a snapshot of, because when it comes to physical training and the people who I respect a lot in the world of physical fitness and physical preparation, like in the conversations you and I have had, there are a lot of the same people. So I know the approach because I've had a similar one For me, I think where I've gone from that same world, because I used to be a personal trainer before I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So there was a lot of overlap between our stories. I think I ventured off into jiu-jitsu, whereas you went to yoga, right? So I still see that same approach. Now, getting to the point where we're going to jump up the timeline for a moment, and you have yoga for the Western body, and you described in the beginning that there are a lot of people have these bodies that are just the product of living in the Western world and doing the things that we do, sitting down a lot, going and getting, if you're that lucky, some 30 minutes of fitness in a fitness facility, and then you go back and sit down. And, so we develop these imbalances, these compensatory issues. And when it all comes down to it, like I was a professional fighter, I fought MMA professionally. I was a professional level grappler. I've run a school, a martial arts school, almost 20 years. The first time I tried yoga, I couldn't even finish the class. And like, I'm a guy who's an elite, I don't know, a professional level power lifter as well. I've done some stuff physically, and yoga it was humbling to say the least. One of the things that I realized early on was I just had all of these specialized developments in my body for the sports that I was doing, but it was completely out of whack with the balance of how my body was designed. So one of the things that I found intriguing about your approach to yoga for the Western body is that you were trying to sort of, if yoga is the road, you are building the path back to that road, right? So what it is that you're showing in yoga for the Western body isn't a new yoga. It isn't, this is how you do yoga if you're from Brooklyn, or from the Bronx or from San Francisco. Like, this is how you could sort of allow your body to build a better relationship with yoga. So sticking with yoga for a second now, if somebody is just starting out yoga, what advice would you give them?
First of all, kind of to echo some of my teachers in the past, is to do your practice. Worry less about whether that practice is perfect or how well you're doing your practice. Make it as regular as possible first. Do that. Once you kind of have a regular practice, then it's a little bit easier to say, okay, well, I think if I shift my weight this way, or if I do this, if I twist a little more in this pose, I can do this pose more effectively, or I'll be more comfortable in this pose. But it all has to come from having that regular practice first. Then you gradually start listening to your body. You start paying attention more to what you're doing, and things that maybe you couldn't do the first time you practiced, maybe you can do it the 1,000th time you practice, or even the 100th time you've practiced. Your body does change if you're doing it regularly, and you'll get feedback one way or the other.
Right. That's solid. So right now we have the world on lockdown. Everybody's freaking out, and a little hyperbolic. Everyone's freaking out, but a lot of people are freaking out. Yoga is something that has brought people not only to a better relationship with their body, but there are also a lot of healthy, immunity-based, benefits to practicing yoga and building that balance that we were discussing earlier. Somebody that's locked up right now in their homes, until wherever they are in the world, until they get back to some semblance of normalcy, what advice would you give them? Literally, maybe what exercises or poses would you tell them to look up and practice? Like, what would you tell people to do from your perspective?
Again, I think part of it comes back to just having that regular practice. I think as far as immunity and things like that go, and something I stress to my students is, if you're breathing while you're doing yoga, it's going to be a lot easier. Yeah, you can hold your breath and try to get into a pose. You're actually going to end up fighting yourself in the end trying to get into that pose. If you can breathe and do a pose, or you can find a way to breathe in a pose, or you can attempt a pose, but make sure you're breathing before you actually reach the end point of that pose, you're probably taking the right approach, or you're taking an approach that's going to work for you. It's going to help you. The breathing itself is going to help with immunity. Some people argue that that's also similar to some things I've heard about martial arts as well. You're kind of, if you can deal with adversity on your yoga mat, like getting into a pose, next time you encounter adversity out in the world, you may have a little bit easier time for it.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. The other day I was having a talk with my sons, and I have 4 kids. I have my boys and the princess. The princess just turned 5. So she hasn't really started training martial arts seriously. You know, she's training, but she doesn't even know she's training, right? The boys, I often have a lot more, directed, productive conversations with them. One of the things that we spoke about the other day was, I told them, I've never seen a master in any physical discipline who hasn't had a relationship with his breathing. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, you'd be surprised to learn that actually in some of my advanced yoga anatomy classes, we actually watched one of the Gracies talk about. We talk about his approach to fighting and to jiu-jitsu was that he wanted to disrupt his opponent's breathing, and if he could do that, he was going to win that match. And at the same time, I guess he kind of implied that if I keep my breathing level while I'm disrupting someone else's, again, I'm going to win that match.
Right. That's exactly right. It's exactly right. Yeah. So let me ask them. In Yoga for the Western Body, I know that, and this is from our conversations, you have a following in New York City. I've sort of prompted and prodded you to try and share this information a little bit more, abroad, or a little bit to have a wider audience. And I think right now it probably helps that the world's on lockdown, and so much of what everybody's doing is through this virtual connection and getting information that way, connecting with people that way. And I know you've developed a lot of things, or in the process of developing a lot of things that eventually will be available for people to see. But to your Yoga for the Western Body systems, what is it that you have coming out, down the pipeline?
Well, I'm working on putting together a website, yogaforthewesternbody.com. On there's going to be, information. There's going to be demos. There's going to be, links to videos where I may show people how to correct certain imbalances that they may have through yoga, or be able to still practice yoga despite having certain imbalances, be able to practice yoga safely. There's an Instagram page, Yoga for the Western Body. Really trying to just now get out into a social media kind of footprint.
Now everybody's got it, right? It's like all of a sudden everybody's figuring out.
Everybody has to now, right?
Well, what are the kids doing on the computer? I got to figure it out, And well, let me ask you. So, who are these products for? Are these just for new people that do yoga?
No, I think new people will get a lot of benefit from it. Like if you're considering starting yoga, or you kind of hesitated because you thought you weren't bendy enough for yoga, or you weren't flexible enough for yoga, a lot of these things will help you kind of get over that. But also, if you're an experienced yogi, a lot of times if you feel like you're stalled out or you're not making progress, however you might define that, it never hurts to go back to the basics, or maybe go back and address some, biomechanical imbalances that maybe you were able to ignore earlier in your practice and now are, maybe holding you back. And so I think
if somebody's doing yoga, I'm sorry to cut you off, but if somebody's doing yoga in a specific style, is there any benefit to using or seeing your information?
Yeah, I think, the information that I try to put forward can be applied to any style of yoga. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same style that I started with. It doesn't have to be, a style that, that person practices only. I think a lot of the biomechanical principles and things that I try to address, or, as we talked about before, that road to get back onto the road to yoga, a lot of times can benefit everybody,
Right.
no matter what version of yoga or brand of yoga you practice,
Right.
or where you're starting from. If you're an ex-dancer who has no problem throwing their leg behind their head, but maybe you're struggling somewhere else in the practice, sometimes some of the basic biomechanical principles that I like to address may help you there as well.
Right on, right on. Two more questions. Number one, what are some, or give me a misconception about yoga? Because I'll be honest with you, and you could relate whether you know it or not. There's a little feed right there. When I was a football guy, a powerlifting guy, a bodybuilder, a professional, like Hicks and Gracie changed a lot of opinions, but prior to really getting into jiu-jitsu, I was an athlete and I lifted a lot of heavy weights. Nobody wanted to do yoga. Like, why? I'm not doing yoga. But a lot of it, I think, had to do with a lot of misconceptions. If you had to say, like, what's a main misconception in yoga, what like, just pick one. What do you think it would be?
That you actually have to be flexible to do yoga. I find that people that are really bendy or just naturally flexible or supple, certain parts of yoga they're going to excel at, yes, but there's also certain parts of yoga they may struggle with. Sometimes, a lot of times, there can be a parallel to how flexible you are, but where your strength is. And I think you can have both, but I think at first, a lot of times, you either depend on one or the other. So somebody who's really strong in yoga, yeah, they're going to struggle with, if they have to do a pose where they put their leg behind their head, they're going to struggle. Meanwhile, somebody that can throw their leg behind their head, they may struggle with a pose that takes a lot of strength, or a pose that requires balance.
Right.
Something along those lines. I think, I used to tell a lot of my students that yoga will show you where your weaknesses are.
Right.
You may come in and be really good at a few poses, and all of a sudden you hit that one pose where you're just going to struggle with it.
Right on. So last question. What is the one, or a one, I'd like to say the one, what is the one benefit of doing yoga? If you had to just distill everything into, like, if, like, you might have somebody that has absolutely no interest in being flexible, or like, listen, I already exercise, but if you said this is the thing that yoga will give you, that it could probably give you better than most other things that are out there nowadays, what is the one thing that you would attribute as in terms of a benefit for practicing yoga?
I think the one thing probably, and you probably might know it from martial arts as well, is just the focus that you need to have that regular practice, to continue to improve, over time, things like that. Delving into something that the expertise you develop, whether it's martial arts, or whether it's yoga, or whether it's fitness, or whether, it's a tea ceremony, any of these things that you might encounter where there's a certain ritual that you have to perform over and over, and you're seeking ways to perfect that ritual. I think yoga is one of those kind of activities where you can do that. And at the same time, you actually will get to know your body a lot better as well.
Right. So it's a discipline that you could build physical mastery.
Physical mastery. Also, I think there's some probably mental mastery that goes along with it as well. It takes a certain kind of person to roll out that mat every day, whether they're feeling good or whether they're not feeling 100%, or they've got a lot going on in the outside world. Or if there's nothing going on in the outside world, it takes, it to be able to get on the mat and forget about the rest of your problems, or to forget about, for at least a little while, things that might bother you, or things that even excite you for that matter, and just focus on what your body's doing, bending and breathing, for the lack of a better term.
Right on. All right. So as we wrap up, just one more time, people could find you on Instagram at Yoga for the Western Body.
Yes. Yoga for the Western Body. Also, yogaforthewesternbody.com.
Yogaforthewesternbody.com. Now, is the website fully designed yet, or it's?
Our website's not finished yet. Still working on it. It's a process. I'm still
You do have
getting
a
an
newsletter.
education as I go.
You have a newsletter though, right?
Yeah, if you go to the website and you put in your email, you will get on our newsletter list, and you'll get newsletters. Yeah.
Right on. So
I will take on yoga and things like that.
Awesome. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate the talk. Now, it's not you're the first yoga person that I've had. So would I call you a yogi? Are you a yogi?
Yes, you can call me a yogi. Yes.
So what is a yogi? Is it a teacher or is it just somebody who does yoga?
To me, a yogi is someone who just practices yoga.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So you're a yogi, right? So you're the first yogi that you've had that I've had on the Pressure Project, and I appreciate it. It's it's very, I would say, interesting for me how over the years I've had to develop different relationships with so many things that I've built dysfunctional relationships with based on myths and misconceptions earlier on. As I've become more developed physically and have achieved more athletically, it's like, oh, wait a minute, this turns out this isn't that bad. Yoga is one of the big ones. Every day I practice I don't do an entire yoga routine, but the breathing aspect of yoga is something that is a huge part of my physical training. And it's something that when I was when I was younger, earlier on, I just didn't assign enough value to. I didn't think it had, I didn't think the juice was worth the squeeze. It's like, I'm not going to get anything out of that. I don't care about doing splits, but it's just not that. And I think as people get more information and there's more overlap in different athletic disciplines, yoga practitioners, martial artists, powerlifters, extreme athletes, like all these different worlds of people that do things with their bodies, they're starting to realize that there's a commonality. And I think yoga is like a huge root of that more people need to be connected to. And I'm saying that as a 5'5", 260-pound powerlifter, so all that being said, Coach Paul, I appreciate your time and thanks for being on the Pressure Project.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.